Hello everyone and welcome back to episode 4 of the Bantamweight Boxing Podcast. Pound for pound, the best boxing podcast around. So our first guest is the man who goes by the name of the Wolf of West London. It's Jimmy Whyte. How are you doing, bro?
Good evening, everyone. I'm good and looking forward to the podcast.
Yeah. Now, on to my next guest, the Tesco value Eddie Hearn. It's Joe Whyte.
I knew my name was coming after that. Yeah, no, I'm good. Can't complain.
And finally, the man who makes Shannon Briggs sound pretty sane. It's Johan Whyte. Let's go, champ. How you doing, bro?
You fucking know it.
You fucking know it, boy.
Let's go.
Yeah, let's go. Anyway, well, after let's go, let's get into the headlines. So, as you know, we do our 3 headlines. And starting off with the first one, we're talking about Dillian Whyte here. And he is taking legal action against the WBC over the date of his title shot. So we all know the drill with Whyte and this title shot malarkey. He's been sidelined by the WBC for God knows how long now. I think it's coming up to about 1,000 days. But Whyte has decided to sue the WBC as it looks like Fury is going to fight AJ next, well, after his Wilder fight, which obviously means that it will be a lot longer before Whyte gets his title shot. So now it's a bit of a tricky one here we've got because I think we can all understand Whyte's frustration. He's been waiting for ages. He fought Rivas, did all of that for the WBC, but now he's continued to be sidelined. At the same time, I don't think there's a boxing fan out there right now who doesn't want to see AJ versus Fury. So, Johan, over to you. What do you think should happen? What do you make of this whole situation with Dillian Whyte?
Can you hear that? Yeah, it's silence. That's how much I care. That's how much I care. I mean, I fell asleep when you were talking about it. Here I am on furlough, sat in my pants with nothing to do. That's not interesting me. That's not even news in my book. I don't care. The only thing I like about it is the 1,000 days sounds like some kind of myth, like it's biblical. Just kind of something stirring, like after 1,000 days. But apart from
Whyte
that,
was walking through the desert for 1,000 days to get this.
Exactly. Yeah. When I think of it like that, that's great. But everything else about it is just bullshit. Give me some better news.
Yeah. Okay. So moving on to the next headline. Anyway, thanks, Johan, for that valuable insight. But can you not have any sympathy for Dillian Whyte, Johan, or no?
I got loads of sympathy for him. If I met him, I'd say to him, I really feel sorry for you, but I wouldn't really mean it. I mean, it's I just want to see the fights. I just want to see people fight. I don't want to hear them moaning about what they could have had or didn't have or should have. For me, it's all about when the bell rings. It's all about the wolf howling, walking into the ring, knocking out Chisora. That's what I want to see from Dillian Whyte. I don't want to hear anything else.
No, that's fair enough. All right, moving on to the next headline. And unfortunately for Johan, this is on something slightly similar. So you might want to mute your mic for a little bit, Johan. But this is AJ could potentially lose his WBO world title if he chooses to fight Fury after Pulev. So as we know, Usyk is the mandatory for AJ's WBO belt. And he's made it very clear that he's not interested in stepping aside for any kind of money. So AJ might have to vacate his belt if he wants to fight Fury. So for Joe, one question I could pose to you here is Bob Arum has kind of come out and said a way we can solve this Dillian Whyte, this Usyk problem is if we get Whyte and Usyk to fight each other and the winner of that gets the winner of AJ versus Fury, and obviously a shot at all 4 belts. Do you think this is a good way of going at it, Joe?
I mean, as a boxing fan, you can't complain if you're seeing a fight like Usyk v Dillian Whyte. That's a brilliant fight. Again, it's a case of a slightly smaller fighter waiting in line for the bigger men to go at it. I'm afraid that's how boxing works, Mike. I mean, there's not a boxing fan out there that doesn't want to see AJ fight Fury. Of course, you can understand both Whyte and Usyk's frustration, both mandatory. But why don't they both fight each other, as Arum suggests, whilst Fury and AJ get on with their respective opponents, and then they can fight each other after the winner of AJ Fury is decided.
I can't help think that that's a tastier fight, Usyk, Whyte. for me, that fight has to happen. I love to see that fight. I'd like to
fight.
see that fight more than the AJ Fury fight.
You know, I think it's definitely a more entertaining fight than AJ Fury. Obviously, there's a lot more behind AJ
It's more
Fury.
likely to happen. It's more likely to
there we
happen.
go.
Yeah.
But just everything, the characters clashing, I think it'll be a much more tastier battle.
Yeah.
It's the one that's going to get overlooked, isn't it? But I think actually, in terms of the fight itself, that could be a very tasty one. But yeah, all right. Moving on to our final headline, Gerald Big Baby Miller has been approved for a boxing license and is set to fight on July the 9th on ESPN. Bearing in mind, he was prevented from fighting only just a year ago for having more drugs in his system than my local smackhead. All right. So over to you, Jim. Are we too easy on these boxing cheats? These drug cheats in boxing. Sorry, God, struggling to get that one out there.
Yeah, look, I think there's no doubt that they've been far too lenient on the baby. I believe everyone deserves a second chance, and look, I think everyone he can turn his career around, but after a year out,
Do you say second toke?
No, I think it's a joke. Allowing him back so soon, really. Hugs, not drugs.
Amen to that. Amen to that. Yeah, no, it does seem like we're a bit too soft on these boxing drug cheats. It almost seems like
why not? I've relaxed all of the rules.
The knockout. The knockout.
When have you been in a fight out on the street when you're not loaded with alcohol, booze, whatever it is, full of drugs? Fighting isn't as much fun sober. Who does sober?
Yeah, to be fair, like if I've seen like the early day UFC fights, and those fighters are like filled to the gills with steroids, and the knockouts in those fights are just ridiculous. But obviously, in reality, it is terrible, and we probably should come down slightly harder on these cheats in boxing.
Well, maybe it's AJ they're selling them to him, so you can't. Swings around.
On YouTube, somewhere in the depths of YouTube, there's a great video of Dillian Whyte talking about AJ steroid use. Very funny, as Dillian Whyte always is. He's a very, very funny guy.
I've seen that, yeah, and that is brilliant.
Good, isn't it? A good one, that one.
Okay, so we've covered the headlines. Let's get into what we believe to be the greatest fights in boxing history. So, does anyone want to kick this off? I'm leaning to Johan here. You're going to kick us off with your greatest
date order,
fight
going back in time. Yeah, I mean, it's difficult to argue this is the greatest fight. It's definitely one of my favorite, and it's definitely some of the most brutal rounds in history. So I'm going to talk about Jack Dempsey versus Jess Willard. So Jess Willard was a scary motherfucker, standing at 6'6" tall and weighing 235 pounds. In 1913, he'd killed Jack Bull Young in the 9th round, hitting him so hard that a piece of his broken jaw had been driven into his skull. In 1915, he'd KO'd the legendary Jack Johnson, becoming heavyweight champ in round 26 of a fight schedule of 45 rounds. Jack Dempsey.
That is ridiculous.
It is ridiculous. Jack Dempsey stood at 6'1" tall and weighed 187 pounds for the fight. Ali prayed to Allah. Pacquiao prays to Jesus, and Fury prays to both. But Dempsey must have been talking to the devil that day. In a place called Toledo, deep in the guts of hell, hair cut like a Peaky Blinder, scowling like Big John Fury, Dempsey walks forward with his fists sheathed in 5-ounce gloves. All you can begin to make out in that old grainy footage is savagery. And beyond those slender skin-tight gloves, you can just make out the pulp face of a giant. With no neutral corner rule, Dempsey stands over him and barely off of the canvas or crouching over the ropes, crumples him with cracks from his left hand. Knocked down 7 times in the first round. Broken jaw, multiple facial fractures, broken ribs, permanent hearing loss in one ear. Willard retired after the 3rd round and only fought in exhibitions after this bout. Jack Dempsey's savagery is legendary, an enduring symbol of the brutality of the sport. and a reminder that at its best, the sport is inherently evil and shows us up for the horrible, sadistic fuckers we are for enjoying it.
That's your epitaph, Johan. That final line.
That's my exactly, and I think really when you boil it down, that fight is a great fight to watch. It's a short fight. It's 4 rounds where you really do get that a kind of savagery that I wouldn't like to see, that you don't see again until Tyson. But obviously, I mean, Mike Tyson, obviously, and Jack Dempsey was an inspiration for Mike Tyson. But that kind of, it's one of the earliest recorded. There are fights prior to that day that are recorded, obviously, but it's one of the earliest recordings of a fight, and it's well worth having a watch as an introduction to the early years of boxing.
Yeah, it's funny. It's funny you talk about the brutality of it, and I know we laugh, but I'm sure none of us have got Floyd Mayweather on their list for the greatest fights of all time. And you have to say that what us boxing fans link with being a great fight is that brutality. I'm sure we've all got, well, apart from you've got a knockout, but there's going to be a load of wars we're about to be talking about, a load of slugfest, a load of brutal fights. And for most boxing fans, you're right. That is what, that is not what we always want to see. But in terms of our favourites, it's got to be that kind of, that evil you're talking about, for sure.
Yeah, definitely. I mean, no one. Exactly. I'm trying to think about that Mayweather analogy, because you could say, some people might say, oh, well, they savor a good Mayweather fight. Like a boxing connoisseur might say that. But I think ultimately it's bollocks. People want blood. They want death. They want tears. They want a bit like when you asked me earlier about Dillian Whyte and the news around that. It's kind of like, well, no, I want blood. Where's the blood? It's boxing. Where's the blood?
Yeah, 100%, 100%. Yeah, and I think I just need to specify as well. Obviously, for this I didn't say earlier, but we're going for our favourite or greatest heavyweight fights. I did just say greatest fights at the start, but for me, the one I've gone for is probably my favourite fight anyway. But the criteria for this podcast was greatest heavyweight fight of all time.
I think, Mike, if you ask most people what their favourite fight is, they're going to say heavyweight. Naturally.
You're going to look to the big guys. Yeah, you do want to look to the big guys.
Exactly.
As Johan once says, no one gives a fuck about anyone below middleweight. But
exactly.
I mean, if we go back even further than this fight in 1919, and I said to you, tell me a boxer or something from the ancient world, you're going to talk about Hercules or someone. Are you going to tell me that Hercules was a little man, or is he going to be a fucking heavyweight? Do you know what I mean? I mean, that's what people want. They want that. So that's us fucking out.
Okay. Anyway, let's move on to the next fight we're going to talk about, and I think it's over to you, Joe. Are you okay to go next?
Yeah, I'm ready for
your greatest fight.
So I've gone for a more recent classic. I can't quite say my two fighters are World War I veterans, like Johan, but AJ Klitschko.
This fight was in colour, by the way.
Yeah. I didn't have to dust off some old stereo, and you know what I mean. But so AJ Klitschko. This is the fight that saw AJ retain his IBF heavyweight championship belt and capture the WBA belt as well, which was previously vacated. It's an instant classic, this one. It had everything. We watched it together, I believe, and if you look at it stylistically, the standpoint that Klitschko...
It's here in my eye.
Yeah, I'm going full poetry here. Yeah, if you look at it from that sort of seeing Klitschko and AJ, the way their styles, they're very similar in certain aspects. In that, they're not the most fluid punchers, but they're very sort of methodical. But the main difference was the experience against the youth. It was wisdom against hunger that night, and I rewatched it recently. And this is my sort of take on it. So rounds 1 to 4 were quite cagey, as you'd expect from a big heavyweight fight like this. They were both sort of feeling each other out, which was expected. Klitschko probably put the better of the work in early on. But then we get to round 5, and I think this round 5 actually got voted round of the year of 2017. And you see a sort of tactical change from Anthony Joshua. He realises to prevent Klitschko establishing the sort of rhythm, he's got to increase his shot output, and he consistently put Klitschko on the back foot. He was landing combos, and eventually he did knock him down. And then throughout that round, both men sort of continued to load up wild hooks. AJ sort of smelt blood, and he hunt Klitschko down. But then the tail sort of swept on its head again, and AJ got wobbled by a Klitschko left hook. And that concluded the 5th round. So that was really like the catalyst of the fight. That sort of set the tone. It was going to be, an absolute battle between the two. Round 6 came about, and AJ, he fell victim to the classic 1-2 hit from Klitschko. We've seen it 1,000 times before, the left and the right. And I've got to say, this knockdown was a lot heavier than the one that AJ gave to Klitschko. But after that round, it was all to play for. I mentioned it when we were speaking earlier. AJ hit Klitschko, I think it was in the 9th round, with a beautiful uppercut. His neck extended way back like a fucking giraffe.
Yeah, the photos of that uppercut are ridiculous.
Yeah, they pause it, and you can see
he grew
it
a couple of inches after that.
Exactly,
uppercut.
But I think
that would have taken your head clean off, Mike. There's no doubt.
Yeah.
Yeah.
But I think I was saying before though that it still, to me, doesn't compare to the Frazier, the Foreman uppercut on Frazier. He lifts him off of his feet, and that commentary that goes with it.
That was like the Wright brothers taking flight for the first time.
Yeah.
That was lifted.
But it does. If we should do a podcast on the greatest uppercuts, and those two would definitely be number 1 and 2.
You've got to include the Lennox Lewis one on Vitaly Klitschko.
Vitaly Klitschko.
Yeah. But what's even better about that uppercut is not just the uppercut; it's the way that Ukrainian
Vitaly takes it.
He just eats it. He's like, Lennox
wait. There's the
Golovkin.
Golovkin as well. Canelo's uppercut on Golovkin.
Yeah, that too was eaten though.
Nod as well. Golovkin nods at him afterwards.
Have you seen Golovkin sometimes in a fight where he actually edges them on? He shows the gloves. Hit me again.
It's like I love it.
No, it's great.
Sorry, I'm actually pretending I'm Golovkin right now while you're talking. I'm nodding now and I'm beating my chest.
It's all in the hips.
Yeah. It's all in your tits, did you say? What?
Anyway, Joe, back to you.
Yeah, so I think that pretty much leads us to round 11, the conclusive round. AJ started fast in that round. Bearing in mind, he's down on the cards at this point. And there's just a flurry of ferocious punches here. And you can see Klitschko just getting battered. And eventually the ref does call it. I mean, there's a case, there's a case to say that it was premature, the stoppage. I'd probably say that myself. I mean, if AJ was on the receiving end of these punches, I reckon if you put it in a context of the other fights we're going to talk about this evening, then in the context of the other fights, they wouldn't have stopped it. They would have let that. They would have let that play out. This is true, but then even on that,
but in the 1920s, they probably would have let them die in the ring. So
I love it. You have to go on YouTube and watch the fight that I talked about, because to watch one heavyweight stand over another heavyweight, no neutral corner rule, and as soon as his fists leave the canvas for him to just get laid into, it's something to behold.
Yo, and there's a sport called UFC. I think it would blow your mind.
Yeah, I forgot about that. But they're all thugs, in it. I like my boxing. Gentleman's sport, mate. Gentleman's sport.
Yeah.
Sorry, I cut in.
Anyway, no, I mean, that pretty much concludes it. I mean, I think I've stated my case. I had to go for a fight that was in my lifetime, at least I felt.
The thing I like
as a modern fight, that is a classic. That is a real classic. And
definitely.
I think what I love,
regardless of the age of it.
Yeah, what I loved about that fight is the pendulum swings one way to the next, and I think that's what's really exciting about it. Is both fighters go down, both fighters get up. Yeah, you just don't know. You just cannot call it.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
And that's what it should all be about. It can change. Heavyweight boxing can change.
And also, I think the other thing about that fight, which you rarely get to see in boxing, is that was really like the passing of the torch. That was like one legend handing.
Well, Jim, I was going to touch on that. It really, I call it the baptism of fire. It was a coronation in many ways. You had Klitschko, a veteran of the sport, you know, great legacy. And it was sort of, you know, passing on the baton to the up and coming Anthony Joshua. I mean, you've got to, when you're talking about that though, I feel you have to credit the heart of Klitschko at 41 years old there. He's standing up against
that he can still
Anthony
pump
Joshua
the blood
there.
around his body.
You know, Anthony Joshua, he's built like a fucking condom stuffed to walnuts. You know, he's ripped to shit. And he's coming in with the fire. In my life. He's coming in with the fire on his name, AJ. It was like Rocky IV, wasn't it? Like,
the entrance was a bit over the top, wasn't it? It was a bit ridiculous.
Yeah.
But I think with that fight, what it does show you, and not to take anything away from AJ or whatever, but it does show you've got to respect that performance against Fury, because I mean Fury's performance against Klitschko, because it shows that Klitschko was still fully there. Like, I know he's an older fighter, but he was someone who could still hang with the big boys, and shows how good of a victory Tyson's was against Klitschko, in my opinion.
And I did consider that, Mike, and I did think about that. And in many ways, like we said in the last episode, the Fury fight was a bit more boring, but it showed the technical ability of Fury. However, what I'd say, if we're talking about the best heavyweight fight, what that Klitschko and AJ fight done, for me, what I feel, it sort of introduced a lot more casuals into the sport. It got the world speaking about boxing again, I think. It was a fight that everyone saw. And, you know, for that reason,
ruined that fight for me by drawing a parallel with Rocky IV. Is that Rocky IV's the Tommy Gunn one, isn't it? That's the
Tommy.
No, that's Rocky V.
Drago.
That's fine. Then it's fine. Then it's fine.
Yeah,
That's fine.
Yeah,
I thought. Go on.
I was going to say, there's only one fucking rule if you're going to be on this podcast, mate. Know your fucking Rocky V films.
Yeah,
man.
exactly.
There's literally, we don't set the bar very high. You don't need to know a lot about boxing, but you need to know your Rocky films.
I brought you into Rocky. You wouldn't even know who Rocky was unless it was for me. And all I'm saying is I thought you were talking about Tommy the Machine Gun, right? And I thought you were talking about it would have been a better fight if you'd have taken it to the street like the end of the film, which is one of the classic endings of any film. Get up, you son of a bitch. He loves you. Someone should have said it to Klitschko. You can just see it, like little Mickey's face in the corner of the ring. You know what I mean? Get up, Klitschko. He loves you. Oh man, that ending. I could literally recite it for you. I really could. You knocked him down. No, I'll try about knocking me down. All of that shit. Love it. And he takes him to the street with all them street moves. Amazing. Anyway, let's move on.
Moving on. Before you recites the whole of Rocky
we
V.
should have done
memory lane.
We should have done a spoiler alert for those that haven't seen Rocky V.
Who couldn't have seen Rocky V?
Yeah, no, that is an incredible fight. The AJ Klitschko fight, a real modern classic, that one. But anyway, let's move on to our next one. Jim, are you ready? Let's hear your greatest heavyweight fight of all time.
Michael, I was born ready. Right, I'm going to take you back to 8th of March 1971, Madison Square Garden. Muhammad Ali and Joe Frazier clashed for the first time in a bout billed as the fight of the century, and boy, did it live up to the billing. This was the golden age of heavyweight boxing. Ali versus Frazier was like the 20th century equivalent of Achilles versus Hector. In an age where men were men and people like Johan were consigned to institutions, these were two undefeated heavyweight champions going toe-to-toe over 15 rounds. This fight was so intense that one ringside spectator suffered a heart attack and died.
Oh, that's amazing.
Why was this the greatest heavyweight fight of all time? Well, more people tuned into this fight than the moon landings 2 years earlier.
Yes.
And my God, this fight was out of the fucking world. To be
right, you just ruined that fact. You just ruined that fact with that fight. That was quite an impressive fact.
Yeah.
All right, sorry.
No, run with it, Jim. Run with it. I liked it.
To be the greatest, you've got to appeal to the masses. You can't just reach the people who would normally enjoy the casual violence that boxing offer. And this fight transcended sport, because it wasn't just a clash of two very different boxing styles, but it was a clash of political ideology. These two fighters symbolize the divide in American society. Ali representing the anti-war, anti-establishment, and Frazier, the pro-war, right-wing establishment. They were champions of their causes, and they would fight, trial by combat. And the fight, when it came to it, did not disappoint. 15 rounds of relentless action. Ali starting the stronger in the first 2 rounds with his slick jab and lightning quick combinations. However, the pendulum would soon swing in the round which Ali predicted would be the knockout, round 6, where Frazier slowly started to assert control and work out Ali's footwork, landing him with some utter bomb of a left hook. Finally, in the 15th round, Ali got dropped for only the 3rd time in his career. But like a true champion, made it back up to the bell. But it was a unanimous victory for Frazier. A fight that was the beginning of what would be one of the greatest trilogy fights in boxing history. Yes. This, without doubt, is numero uno.
Yeah, that is yeah. It's a hard argument against Ali Frazier, isn't it? Like that, you know, Frazier in that fight, the body work he puts in on Ali in that fight is incredible. You know, he's almost sitting on Ali's chest the whole fight, throwing bombs to the body, then comes upstairs with these left hook, right hooks. It's an incredible fight. It's a serious war.
You know, one of the things I loved about it was the trash talking. You know, they trashed what you see in a lot of fights, modern fights, is people trash talk to sell a fight. But these guys hated each other. They hated each other. They hated each other so much that the trash talking didn't stop when the bell rang. The trash talking was even worse in the ring. And, you know, that's what I absolutely loved about it was, you know, the venom in the punches that they threw. And, you know, what I love about the whole story is, you know, Ali, undefeated, takes his first defeat, but he comes back, you know, beats him twice. And, you know, you've got to have, so, you know, there's normally when you choose your greatest fight, you have your favorite boxer, but, you know, seeing these two guys slug it out, you can't help but admire both of them. But some of the left hooks that Ali took in that fight just proved what a champion he was. You know, he took so many of those massive left hooks. And
he took one of the best left hooks of all time. In that fight,
definitely.
It's you know.
I don't think Frazier throws a jab, does he? He's just like I don't think he throws a jab.
Why waste the energy?
What's on Ali? Throwing these bombs upstairs.
With the trilogy, Jim, why did you choose the first fight?
I think the reason why I chose the first fight is because they were both undefeated. It was at a time in society where there was a massive divide, and that fight really captured the imagination of not just America but the world. And I think what was fascinating.
Look, Jim, if you want to do a politics podcast, you can fuck off and go and do that. I just want to know about boxing. In fact, I'm going to bring it back.
Well, go on, you go.
I was going to say, I'm going to bring it back to Rocky, right, where I feel most comfortable. And it's a really serious one. I'm going to make one single point that I'm a massive fan of Smoking Joe Frazier. And as I understand it, I might be wrong, but there is actually a statue to Rocky in Philadelphia where there is not one to Joe Frazier. And I just think that on a really serious point, I just think that that's disgraceful that a man of his caliber. I know that in Jimmy's mind, he represents right-wing politics. I'm not so familiar with that, but purely when we see that Ali consistently referred to as the greatest, and in many ways very accurately, that greatness kind of were punches that rebounded off of the head of Joe Frazier, a very important head. There should be a statue to it.
I say we start a petition on this podcast.
Let's do something. Let's do some good with this podcast and get a statue of Joe Frazier.
I hear they're getting rid of a lot of statues in our country. Maybe we could melt them down and create one of Smoking Joe.
A huge one of Smoking Joe.
But I'll leave you with a final quote from the fight when they just before the first round. Ali goes up to Joe Frazier and he says, "You're in the ring with a god tonight." And Frazier just turns around to him and says, "If you're a god, you're in the wrong place tonight."
Yeah, beautiful. I mean, amazing. Just amazing, the relationship between the two of them.
I think. Sorry, go on, yeah.
Well, it's just one of the reasons why I love Joe Frazier is I think he's a true champion that the every man can relate to, in a way that they can relate to Joe Frazier, but they can only be inspired by Muhammad Ali. Muhammad Ali is almost too good to be true.
Impeccable. Yeah.
You can't be like him, really, can you?
I think what
Frazier, you can have that.
Yeah, what encapsulates that, and I think you're spot on with that point, is at the time, Ali was the rebel. And, Frazier stood for conformity. The masses flocked to Frazier, but actually what history looks back on Ali as the great one, because actually they realized that Ali was ahead of his time. The stuff that he fought for, it looks positively on him, when you look at it from a perspective.
And even his whole persona with "I'm the greatest." This is, this is the me show. No one used to do that before, but now every boxer has that to say. And I think he had a lot to do with that as well. And when you talk about being ahead of his time,
but talking about the giving it that historical perspective, it does introduce that note of sadness, though, where when we talked about the Klitschko and the AJ fight, I get the feeling that although it's a thrilling, hard fought fight, that when they're old, they'll still be able to speak and still be completely with it. Whereas the fight that I know that Mike is going to talk about, and even I know that with Muhammad Ali, it wasn't necessarily boxing related, what the issues he had when he was old, but you can't help but think that the amount of punishment that people like Ali took, that it can't have anything but a detrimental effect.
Just on that topic of the punishment. Well, I was listening to a podcast where Mike Tyson was talking, and he was saying where a lot of the damage came is because the science at the time when Ali was fighting, they believed the head guards when they were sparring absorbed a lot of the punishment they were taking during sparring matches.
And it was all the through sparring.
Yeah, they said like in sparring they would take loads of damage, and they thought they were okay because they had the head guards, but actually that was the reason why basically, did so much damage to Ali so early in his life, unfortunately. But one thing I'd also say about the fight Jimmy's talking about, and why it was so great, is that point about the hatred. And you see so many fighters nowadays, or so many fights being made, and they try and mimic that. They try and mimic, oh, we hate each other, but it's so fake, it's so forced. You can see straight through it. They're trying to sell the fight. But when you get that sweet spot, and I'm talking about Dillian Whyte Chisora here, like you get that sweet spot, that's the modern day brother. I know I'm going to get crucified for making an analogy between Muhammad Ali and Dillian Whyte. But what I'm trying to say, if you bear with me, is that point of sometimes in a fight across all weight classes, you get that sweet spot where it's like, oh no, these men, if they can kill the other one in the ring, they're going to try and do it. And it's that which sometimes makes for, I sound like an absolute cynicist the way I'm talking right now, but you see my point. I get
what you're saying. Right? You almost saw it with Tony Bellew and David Haye. That's the only one that springs to my mind. Like you see with Fury, he's such a character that he doesn't really hate Anthony Joshua. He doesn't really, he just took the piss out of Vladimir. He doesn't really, there's no hatred there. And you're right. We want to see that. We want to see two men absolutely at each other's throats to the death of it.
But I
think we might all get checked into a psych ward after this, after the way we spoke about the brutality of boxing. But
especially as Johan not giving a shit about the drugs testing as well.
I'm high right now, right? I'm not even going to be.
Okay, I'm going to go into my greatest heavyweight fight of all time to wrap this all up. And so I've gone for the first fight between Evander Holyfield and Riddick Bowe back in 1992. Ooh. So I think to understand the brilliance of this fight, I've got to set the stage. You've got Holyfield, 30 years old, undefeated, unified heavyweight champ of the world, coming up against Big Daddy Bowe, who's also undefeated. He's knocking everybody out. Like he's killing people in the ring. Like he's literally knocking everyone out. And just as a side note, just a bit of trivia that I've just remembered. 3 heavyweights, right, have all come from the same area, Brownsville in New York, all right? 3 heavyweight champions. Can you name them? The first one is Riddick Bowe.
I know Mike Tyson. Yeah,
Mike Tyson.
And you know what? Yeah. I have a feeling it's Shannon the Cannon.
It's Shannon Briggs.
Shannon the Cannon. Yeah. There we go. Let's go, champ.
From a small neighborhood like that, you've had 3 animals knock out.
There's something in the water over there, mate.
Something in the water there. They are serious serious fighters. But I just had to.
I'm going to go
make
drink
that
from the
comment.
fountain.
Yeah, I don't think they have fountains, unfortunately, there. But
you have to fight for your water.
Yeah, I think that might have been part of it. But yeah, so anyway, you've got Riddick Bowe coming up against him. He's knocking everyone out. He's double the size of Holyfield. He's like 6'5", and he's the young man. I think we've all had this kind of narration with a few of our fights, definitely with Klitschko and AJ. That kind of it's enjoyable to see the younger fighter coming up against a more experienced fighter. Not to say that Holyfield is old at 30, but definitely more experienced. So you're thinking who's going to get the better of the two, you know, the young, hungry fighter, the powerhouse, or the more technical and experienced Holyfield. So before I've even said anything about the fight, you know, the fans were in for a treat in this one. You know, it's similar to how we talk about AJ Fury. It's mouth-watering, super exciting. It's solidified for me as one of the greatest fights purely because of Riddick Bowe's ring entry. He's coming into the ring, and all you hear is his footsteps are going. And just before he gets into the ring, you hear, dum, 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 dum. I can hear it calling in the air tonight. Like, you hear that, and like never has Phil Collins ever sounded so gangster in like,
fucking menacing.
History.
Yeah. And I love how that song is about a man killing another man as well. Just
yeah. So it's
cherry on top.
Yeah, seriously, fuck,
yeah, that's what that song's about.
I didn't know that.
Are you into it now? Are you into it?
I made love to that song.
No, it's about a man watching another man kill another man and sort of hiding it, something like that.
That's how I felt. That's how I felt watching this fight. I wasn't that man Phil Collins is talking about. But anyway, enough chat. On to the actual fight. So, the fight starts, and you're expecting Bowe really to establish his jab. He always had a mean jab back in the day, one of the best around in that time. And he's the bigger man. You're thinking he's going to try and establish it, keep Holyfield on the outside. But fuck no. That bell rings, and that man just said, fuck it, let's fight. And it's 12 rounds of just war. I don't think a jab is thrown by either man in that whole fight. They just go straight, toe-to-toe, slugging, throwing absolute bombs in the center of the ring. Left hooks, both work in the body. And you're thinking there's no way Holyfield can stand with this guy. He's double his size. You know, just to put it into perspective, Holyfield's like 6'2" or whatever. He only weighs about 205 pounds. Bowe's weighing about 235, you know, similar to what Yoan's talking about. You've got a giant next to this cruiserweight. You know, he's a cruiserweight Holyfield at the time. Big difference. And they're slugging it out. And you're thinking, Holyfield can't stand with this man. But my God, he does. And it's, 12 rounds of just slugging. The ref's got no control over the fight. The ref's trying to stop them from punching each other after the bell. They don't give a damn. They're going for it. Pure hatred. And as the rounds go on, I think, Holyfield gets a cut to his eye, and, you see this real warrior mentality from Holyfield. And something which I don't think is spoken about enough for him is his heart, man. I don't know what was, spurring him on, if it was that porno tash, if there was some kind of magic working in that thing there. I don't know what the hell.
Pacquiao had that going for him as well.
Yeah, that as well. But it gets to about the 8th round, and Bowe, you're seeing the stronger man is starting to take control. Holyfield's shots are just not really causing him any problems. And I can't remember what round it is, but it's one of the later ones. And Holyfield gets knocked down. But this guy jumps back up. He can't see out of one eye. He's been beaten to shit, and goes and gives it to him and gives it to Bowe in the next round, and nearly knocks Bowe out in the next round. It's incredible. It's an incredible fight. You've got to go and watch it. And Holyfield gives it 110%. But unfortunately for him, Bowe comes out with the unanimous. I can't remember if it's unanimous, but it's definitely a points victory. And it's just a great fight. It's a great war. And, you can tell it's a great fight because you look, was there a trilogy? Of course there was a fucking trilogy. These guys went and fought 2 more times. But, incredible fight. And it's just, you don't get those kind of fights anymore. Hopefully we will.
I would have said,
it's more about, sorry, you go.
I just say I felt it was very similar to the AJ Klitschko fight. I just think it's almost in some ways harder to watch because of the level of punishment that's dished out from the first to the last round. You'd almost hope that someone would someone would have called it off earlier in the fight.
You could tell the corners had it didn't cross their mind about throwing that fucking towel. It didn't cross their mind.
I think that they were probably as captivated as
yeah. I think that's what makes giving them. I think
I
like the stat that Jim introduced. I think we should use Jim's idea for evaluating all fights, which is how many people died of a heart attack watching that fight. That's all I want to know.
Yeah, that does. Yeah.
Because you had a stat at the start of when you were talking. You had a stat, and I can't remember what it was now, but I kept thinking to myself, "Oh, that's not as good as the moon landings, Mike."
Not as good as
Jim came up with a classic there. You should have. Don't go toe to toe with him, Mike. Don't go toe to toe tonight.
I won't. But what I do
a woman gave birth and she wasn't even pregnant in that fight.
No, but what I was going to say is what I do love about the Bo Holyfield fight is, the corner men are, they're talking in their ear. They're trying to tell them tactics. Bo, use that jab. You've got an amazing jab. Keep them on the outside working. And none of it's going through. None of them is going through their head. They're asking each round, what round is it? What round is it? They've got no idea what round
Where am I?
It's all merged. Where the fuck am I? Where's my mum?
Yeah, it's that beautiful primal moment where I spend my life, you're fucking looking at some computer screen or whatever it is, chatting shit and bollocks and having to be polite all of the time. And then you get 45 minutes on YouTube of watching two people they're in a zone, they're in a primal zone, some kind of hunter-gatherer zone where it's like warfare, murder, hunting is all that they know. Do you know what I mean?
But with that as well, it's like the end of that fight. Yes, Bo won that fight, but it wasn't in those kind of fights. It's not really about a winner or a loser. Like it's not really about everyone cheered Holyfield's name when he left the thing because everyone saw this guy is a champion and he's got a heart of a lion. To stand and trade with someone like Bo. It's just a shame we never got to see Bo versus Lennox Lewis.
We ain't got time to go there.
Yeah, that's for another podcast. That is for another good podcast.
Save that for a rainy day.
Greatest fights we missed out on because there's plenty you could talk about.
It's so difficult to choose. I mean, I feel like I haven't even mentioned Sonny Liston's name the whole time we've been talking. Like there's lots of it's very hard to choose a fight.
Yeah, but on that note, I think we've all listened to some great fights there, and I think Jimmy's one probably takes the biscuit. It's the greatest of all time, isn't it? It's Muhammad Ali. It's what a fight that is. With
when Frazier, you think big boxers, you think Frazier. You think
Frazier. What a fight. But anyway, I think we'll wrap that up there. Is everyone going to say goodbye?
Yeah. Yep. Thanks for tuning in, guys.
Bye, everyone. Thank you.
Goodbye. Cheers.
Thank you, everyone, for listening. Please like and subscribe. Goodbye.